Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, medical doctor, PhD, Reiki, and shaman intuitive healer. I'm here to bring you on a holistic healing journey that explores the science of the physical body combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. And I am so excited today to bring you on a journey with Pat Divilly. The magical Pat Divilly has joined us today to talk all about wellness and breathwork and many, many wonderful things. It's so nice to see you, Pat, first of all.
Yeah, you too. I think last time I saw you was it Galway? A couple of
Yes.
years?
Yeah,
A
yeah,
couple of years
yeah.
now, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I see you regularly, obviously on Zoom, doing your online breathwork sessions. And
Okay.
then I had done a handful of your in-person breathwork sessions as well. And they've just been so brilliant. And actually, I just want to rejoice in your merit for a minute, Pat, before we get stuck into the conversation. Because actually, you were the one who introduced me to conscious connected breathwork. And actually, my breathwork journey really began with you. Um, and
Okay.
that has been so transformative for me over the years that I've kind of gone deeper and deeper into that with holotropic breathwork and pranayama breathwork. And it's shown me how to access parts of myself that I actually never knew existed.
Oh, cool. Nice.
And that's all thanks to you. So like it's been such a gift. I was connected with you many years ago through a friend who had done some of your work, and obviously you had your podcast, and there's just so many facets to what you offer and how you provide healing for people. And you know, you're one of the main protocols that I go to when my clients come through the door. I'm like, you need to get in touch with Pat and
Okay.
do Pat's breath work to kind of process the emotion that's trapped within the body. And even the people who do come through and are already familiar with you, you're bringing people on a journey of transformation that, uh, like, it's just such a special gift what you offer people. And just from my experience and from my heart, I want to say thank you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
sometimes, you know, in
I'll
Ireland,
take
it's
that.
so crazy because we never really stop to appreciate actually where we've come from, the milestones, and sometimes we just don't get to value or appreciate the impact that we're having on people's lives. And from someone that works with clients every day, and from my own journey, I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing.
It's a nice way to start a podcast. I appreciate it. And funnily, the man who brought me to breathwork was, I should acknowledge him. I don't know his name, but I was at a festival in Costa Rica years ago, and this flamboyant Italian man arrived at dinner and he said, "We're going to the beach to breathe." And we went into the breathwork session. I didn't know what had happened, but it blew me wide open. And that was the start of my journey. So it's interesting
Yeah.
how it happens. So shout out to the Italian
With the
man with
amazing shirt.
the yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I think I had actually, it was only through some of your online sessions that I did that I became familiar with other breathwork practices that set me off on my journey. And you've done a lot of kind of varying different breathwork training, and you offer different practices. And you, in your workshops, you do a lot of trauma release stuff as well. And I'd love to just hear kind of what your journey of evolution with that has been, and how you feel breathwork helps to release trauma within the body.
Yeah. This was never supposed to be what I was doing, I don't think. I was a fitness guy growing up. That was the first thing that gave me confidence, was fitness and martial arts. I'd been bullied a lot when I was young, and so fitness was the first thing that I did, where I suppose fitness is something where you're responsible for your results. And so when you see results, you can kind of take confidence in that, or at least that was my experience, that it wasn't a team sport. It wasn't something that I could buy. It was something I had to work for. And so that led me on a path of professionally pursuing fitness. And I failed pretty miserably with my first business and fell into a depression and a lot of shame, because I was driven by insecurity and the kind of belief that if I achieve something in business, it'll make me enough. And so when I failed, it almost did the opposite. But started again. it kind of took off for me the second time around. Right time, right place, right person, right social media platform. And I came in on Facebook back in 2011, probably, when it wasn't being done. And I think it was the first Irish guy doing online fitness at scale. So went from 5 clients to 20,000 clients in 4 years. So my whole life changed. And I suppose between working with clients, working with that many clients, I was naive at 21, 22, thinking fitness is about training and nutrition and push-ups and broccoli. But then you work with 20,000 people from varying backgrounds, and you come to see sleep and stress, and more than anything, I think self-talk affects, the results that we see. So then I kind of steered away from fitness. I started looking at cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnosis and logotherapy and Jungian work and all this, the mind basically. And that was useful up to a certain point. I would set goals. I would challenge my limiting beliefs. I would do all the cognitive work, and it was great up to a certain point. But I found my late 20s, I had kind of ticked all the boxes that cognitively made sense. It's kind of a cliche story, but I had bought the house and met a great partner and built this business I'd always dreamed of. And I was still riddled with anxiety and stress and imposter syndrome. And the more I achieved, the more of a magnifying glass I actually felt on my insecurities. I thought the insecurities would go away, but it almost made them more, because it was kind of like when you're depressed or anxious and you can point to things that are wrong, it kind of makes sense on some level. But when everything's quote unquote right and you still feel miserable about yourself, it can be, for me at least, it was jarring. And I came to the breathwork, like I mentioned, with this flamboyant Italian man, and he just disappeared from the beach. At the time, I couldn't quieten my mind. I tried to meditate because everyone said you should meditate, but my mind would get really busy, and it was a challenge for me. And so when he led us through a breathwork on the beach, I assumed when I opened my eyes that everyone else would be still deep in meditation. But I went so deep that when I opened my eyes, everyone had pretty much left the beach. I said, wow, like this was something different for me. But it took me a year to figure out what had happened. And then I met Wim Hof, and I went and spent a week with Wim, and started exploring breath work, and started noticing that it was having an impact and bringing up emotion for me that was locked in the body, if you will. And strangely, I was in a float tank, like a flotation tank, probably a couple of years ago now. And I had done this a couple of times before, but once in the float tank, my body started just tremoring. And normally I would have stopped the tremoring because it was strange, or I would have gotten out of the tank or whatever. But I had actually read a book about shamanic practice where in Native American cultures, sometimes when the soldiers would come back from war, the whole village would come out and make a circle, and the soldiers would sit in the middle of the circle or lie down, and they'd cry and they'd tremor and they'd release all this emotion from the trauma that they'd been through at war. And there was a witnessing by the tribe. And they compared the difference between the PTSD rates of these soldiers that came back into these natural healing modalities versus the soldiers that went back to normal life, if you will. And the soldiers in the Native American backgrounds were not getting PTSD the same way that and they thought, wow, this must be something in their culture. But then they took the general population and put them into the same healing modalities, and the PTSD was again not happening. So they recognized the sweat lodge and all these traditional means of healing and being witnessed in your healing made such a difference. So then I came across trauma release exercises, and it's just been an evolution of leaning into the next thing and the next thing. But ultimately what we're looking at is when we experience trauma, which is anything that's too much or too quick or too soon, or not enough of, is another experience of trauma. So like complex trauma would be not having our needs met for an extended period of time. This is traumatic for a child, of course. There's two things for me that I see happening. So when I was bullied as a kid, the first thing that happens is there's fear. And so the body responds by clenching and armoring around the emotion. We tend to stop breathing when we're fearful. We gasp and we lose our voice. So those three things get lost: my voice, my movement, my breath. And so it's trapped in the body, trapped in the nervous system. And so my nervous system freezes in that response, and I go back out into the world, and the world could be safe, but my body is perceiving that the world is dangerous. And so I'm not able to access perspective. I just see threats and fears. It's like a soldier coming back from war and being afraid of their kids because they've just been in this hyper aroused state for months, looking for threats. The other things that happens alongside the body response is we develop sub-personalities to keep ourselves safe going forward. So when I was bullied, my system froze. I became fearful of people, and my psyche created characters to keep me safe. So I became an overachiever. I became a people pleaser. I became many different things, and that became my strategies. So I think the journey of healing is those two things. It's letting go of what's being held in the body and it's recognizing who I became to stay safe and how that might be impacting me now. Like the a lot of men, as a kind of generalization, were told boys don't cry, and so they physically armored around the emotion of sadness, and so they'll hold that tension in the body, particularly down the front of the body, and then they'll have become probably stoic, overachieving, hardworking, tough guys, or stoic, whatever it might be. So
Oh my God. I'm literally just like fascinated by this. Like, I feel like you're speaking to my soul personally. So I feel like everybody listening, I hope it resonates as deeply with them, because everything that you're talking about with regard to shame and the different characters that you have to live, and it just speaks to me so deeply, and I'm so grateful for your vulnerability with sharing that. And I think it's a journey in itself to actually get to the place where you feel actually you can lean into that vulnerability to talk about even being bullied as a child, and even to allow yourself to be vulnerable in the space of actually these are all the characters that I created in my life, these are all the hats that I wore on my journey back to authenticity. I thought, as a journey as a gay man through this world, I didn't realize what shame was up until only a couple of years ago. And when I went deep into that, like it it profoundly was impacting me and my life and how I identified with the world and my relationships, how I made friends with people. And it was so debilitating, but it was something that was so blind to me, you know? And through the sessions that I do with you, actually, I love setting an intention before I go into the session, and I love how you walk people through that. And the power of intention has been so powerful, because actually, I do a lot of energetic work, and I love that you talk about the shamans, because I generally set the intention to go into my root chakra, or the kind of that base where I hold a lot of fear and shame, and I'm like, let's clear this out. And oftentimes when I set a deep intention like that, I'm scared going into the session because I know it's going to be insane.
yeah.
And the shaking that happens during those sessions are it's just wild what we actually hold in the body.
Yeah.
And is this like when you obviously still do a lot of breath work yourself, do you?
Yeah, I go through different practices, but I've leaned back more into the breath work again. But sometimes I've been trying to get more into dance and more into
Yeah.
bioenergetics.
Mm,
Dance is an interesting one for me in that, like I say, there's that overachiever part of me that's always kind of living in the future and trying to do more and learn more and experience more. And it's a very linear way of living, which can be quite
mm,
limiting. And so dance and things like that, I think, get you out of your kind of patterns because you're not planning what's going to happen next year. I went to an ecstatic dance with Aubrey Marcus years ago, who's a podcaster out in the States. And I remember him saying, it made a lot of sense to me at the time. He was saying, between hearing the music and moving your body, there's a space. And you're trying to get rid of that space because the space sort of represents fear. It's like I hear the music and all this shame and self-doubt, and inner critic is saying, oh, I don't know, maybe don't move your arm that well. How do normal people dance? What am I? And he's like, if you can get all that noise out of the way and just connect with the music, which sounds a bit woo-woo, that's the work. And I guess that's how we connect to intuition, I think, and everything else. But
mm,
you mentioned shame and not being aware that there's shame there, and I think that was true for me as well, and I think it's true for a lot of people. And
mm,
something I've become aware of is the inner critic. The voice of the inner critic is the voice of
mm,
shame. So if you've got an inner critic, you've probably got some shame, which is the belief that I'm unlovable, I'm not enough, there's something wrong with me, I'm inherently flawed. And
mm,
as you know, there's toxic and there's healthy shame. Healthy shame
mm,
is I did something wrong and I need to kind of adjust my moral compass, maybe, or be in integrity. And healthy shame is I did something wrong, so I'm a bad person. And a lot of that's
mm,
down to how we were parented and how our parents maybe supported us or challenged us when we made mistakes. Did I
mm,
take on the belief that I'm unlovable because I broke the cup in the kitchen? Or did I say, oh, I made a mistake and I need to be a bit more careful, or whatever it might be? So do a lot of work now and working with the inner critic. And it's a bit random, but it was funny. I was watching a video about shame the other day, and the lady was talking about how it's a mammalian thing that if you look at a dog that knows that they've made a mistake, the dog will kind of cower away. You can see in their physiology that they're embarrassed or they're ashamed. And it's the same for us. There's
mm.
that physical sense of collapse and
Yeah.
losing. I almost think of it as there's the healthy adult part of us that can be grounded and have perspective and make great decisions and be compassionate and curious and all these things. There's the wounded child who's fearful and
Mm,
scared of the world, which is kind of the voice of shame, or the energy of shame. So I collapse from the world. And then there's the teenager, the defensive teenager who tries to protect the inner child. So when we experience shame, a lot of us, the reason we don't maybe connect with the shame is because we've come up with really good strategies for getting away from the shame as quick as possible. So a common one is when men feel shame or embarrassed, they go to aggression. So that's
mm,
their default setting. So someone teases me, I feel that collapse and that shame, and very quickly I shift into and I go for the other person. So it could be, I numb myself when I feel shame. I distract myself when I feel shame. I go to addiction when I feel shame. I move to
mm.
guilt when I feel shame. I move to so that can be an interesting piece to explore. And again, coming back to the breath work, I think the value of the breath work is you just breathe into that space without having to change it. And then you can kind
Mm,
of learn from it. Okay, the shame is this, the
yeah.
belief is this, this is where the belief came from. It's not true. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, I love that you talk about kind of dogs because you can always tell. Now, I have a cat and he does not give two craps about nothing. But the dogs always, you could tell. But I find it fascinating even just watching them because, if they experience a bit of a trauma, they get up and they shake it off,
Yeah.
and they can just get on about their day. Whereas I think with humans, when we feel it, I know in my body when I go into that space of nervous system overwhelm or a wound is triggered within me that I've carried from my own childhood, I go into complete hypoarousal.
Hmm.
Like that's my default place to go to. So it's interesting because now that I'm aware of that through obviously the work that's been done to get to this point, when I start to go into that space where my body, I'm starting to tune out a little bit. I'm like, oh, actually, hang on, what is going on here? That's being triggered within me here.
Yeah. Yeah. And
you know.
it's amazing to, yeah, there's interesting work you can do around kind of mapping your nervous system and mapping the signs. And the one of the things that I came to learn was that your whole physiology changes. I mean, when you go into that fight or flight response, you experience tunnel vision, which makes sense. Like you tunnel in on what the challenge is and you lose perspective. So you only see the worst case scenario. So that's the tunnel vision aspect. But something else your hearing changes, your taste
Mm,
changes, your smell changes. You notice with your hearing that I've noticed myself that when I experience anxiety, I struggle to connect or hear the person who's 2 feet away from me, but I can pick up on all the sounds in the background. So I'm in the coffee shop and I'm struggling to focus on the person I'm with, but I can hear all this noise in the background, and that's a survival response. So
mm,
um, I see learning how, as you say, your response is X and my response is Y. And coming back to the dogs, if we're in a room and a dog comes into the room, if someone's scared of dogs, they're going to have a very different response to the person who loves dogs. And so everyone's system is different, which is why I think it's important that people come to understand their system. What are the signs
mm,
that I've left my zone of regulation, and what are my practices for getting back? Because again, the
mm.
practices will be different, but I think it's a skill that's really useful to develop. Is
Yeah.
because sometimes we think about self-care as being the list of things to do, like I'm going to go to my yoga class and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to drink water, and these are all good practices, but I think the ultimate act of self-care is to be able to check in regularly as to how I am and what I need. Because I could
Mm,
wake up this morning with the best plan in the world, but if I'm exhausted, probably what I need is rest. And so
mm,
true self-care will be to check in honestly with myself. How do I feel? I feel exhausted. What do I need? I need deep rest. What's my plan? Yoga
mm,
nidra today, for example.
mm,
um, but sometimes in our
mm,
head, we're like, okay, well, my list was to go and lift weights for an hour. So
mm.
I'm going to shame myself if I don't meet this perfect list, you know? So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, oh God, that resonates with me. It's so funny. I think when you grow up as the eternal people pleaser and the helper, and you facilitate everybody else's needs and wants and emotions, you can definitely get into that space where you just blindly go and fulfill all of these requirements that are set of you. And especially, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm a devil for doing lots of work, like working myself into the ground. And over many years, it actually was identifying, first of all, what my pillars of kind of self care were, And it was gas because actually many years ago, like in lifestyle medicine, there's 6 pillars that we often use to our lifestyle medicine training. And I think to myself, it's all well and good. They're all great things to live by, and they totally make sense. It's very like it's common sense that if you eat well and you get a bit of sleep, that it works. But the reality of it is, like, it did work for a time for me because actually it was quite new for me to lean into a better sleep schedule and to be going to the gym regularly, and like things that actually weren't common sense to me maybe during my teens. But it's interesting because then the further into the journey you get, and then you actually start to actually check into the body,
Mm.
and like the body keeps the score essentially. It has all of the information that we need to go on our journey of healing. And all of a sudden, these little bits and pieces that I was using as part of my self-care routine, I was like, this isn't cutting it anymore, actually.
Mm.
Like, my anxiety is coming back. I was like, what's going on? I need to go obviously deeper into this. And it's so interesting that you talk about kind of finding what works best for you, because back at that stage, I would have said to everybody, well, the 3 things that mean the most to me are healthy eating. I love having healthy food in the fridge. That gives me peace of mind. My exercise and my daily meditation. I was like, you should do that. That will work for you too. Those 3 things work for me. That will work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it wasn't working for everybody because everybody's journey is so different with this.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the dogs shaking and letting go of the stress, and it's interesting with animals. What will happen is, um, before the dog has the shake, maybe taking a different animal as an example. If we're in the wild and there's a zebra that's about to be attacked by a predator, the zebra will first response will be I'm going to fight the threat if they feel they can beat the threat. So that's the first kind of primal response. The second is I'm going to run away. So I'm going to flight. So fight, flight. And the third response is I'm going to fall over and play dead. So freeze. Because predators want to chase their food. They don't want to just gnaw on something playing dead. But what happens is once they come out of the freeze response, the first thing they'll do is they'll orientate. So they'll look around their environment to see if they're safe. And only then do they shake. And what I kind of take from that is that when we're really busy, when we're really stressed, when there's lots going on, it's almost like kind of like high performance or high functioning anxiety, I guess, in a way that I can keep going and keep going and keep going. Sometimes then Christmas comes or a holiday comes and suddenly we get sick or suddenly our stuff comes up. And so, as you say, different tools for different times. And sometimes when you're really looking after yourself and you come to a really good place, sometimes stuff comes up then because maybe on some level your body and your psyche has a sense of, okay, he can handle this now, he can deal with this now. Whereas when you're stressed and you've got a lot going on, I mean, one of the key tenets of stress is that you're going to address the thing that's right in front of you. You're not going to look at the bigger picture. And so what that looks like in communication is you're going to fight to defend yourself. If there's an argument, you're not going to think of the bigger picture. In work, you're going to do the thing that gives immediate reward or puts out an immediate fire, but you're not going to look at the bigger picture. So maybe when we calm ourselves and ground ourselves and get to a better place, that's why it is non-linear, is because then we maybe need to deal with a bit of a backlog that's not being addressed when we've been in fight or flight states.
What you were saying about when you get to Christmas and you go down like a ton of bricks, this is something that I see very regularly, actually. And I'm seeing more and more clients coming through that are on breaks from work because they've actually reached complete burnout. And then as soon as they stop, their whole body goes into a complete meltdown state. And they've reached breaking point, and that's what has brought them through my door, because they've seen the GP, they've had their bloods done, everything's fine. And when they come through to me, their gut is completely destroyed. They're in a complete state of anxiety, and they're in a fight or flight state, or in a complete like state of hyperarousal themselves. And it's interesting because, they've held the energy of stress, of all the trauma, of everything that's been happening for me. They've held it, or for them, below the surface. And it's almost like it's bubbling away, it's bubbling away, it's bubbling away. And then when they reach the breaking point, they give their body a chance, a bit of safety to actually to just stop operating at that level. Then the body goes into a complete state of meltdown. And I started this journey, funnily enough, and I originally set up my Instagram as to talk
Mm.
about gut health, because I had a lot of gut health issues myself on my journey with anxiety. And, you know, I just wanted to give people the tools through my medical training and everything to eat well for their gut and for their body. But the further I got into this, and then obviously I started training in energetic practices, I was like, oh my God, actually, a lot of what we're holding in the body that's affecting the gut is energetic. It's the energy of shame, it's the energy of fear, it's the energy of guilt. And, you know, through the chakra based system, all of those emotions and those deep, heavy energies, they're all held in the energy centers linked to the solar plexus in the gut or the stomach, or the lower energy centers in the body, that are kind of predisposing people to constipation or loose bowels. And I love that you, when we were talking there a minute ago, you were talking into the energy of what was being held in the body. And you say that you're kind of on a journey now with kind of leaning more into that aspect of your practice as well, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the way I see it all is that we're all in a box that we've created or has been created for us.
Mm,
So what did they say? That first our world shapes us, and then our first our world shapes our beliefs, and then our beliefs shape our world. So those early messages
mm,
gave us beliefs, and then those beliefs we carry kind of show us the world that we live in. And so my question is always around like what's beyond how I've seen myself up to this point.
mm,
So I was an Irish man who can't dance and da 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 da. Da. So now it's like let's challenge the different assumptions and let's like sometimes think about it like if all of your beliefs have put you in a box,
mm,
the box is probably tiny compared to what's outside of the box.
mm.
And life and adventure and enjoyment and fulfillment, I think, is often outside of that. So yeah, I'm just constantly leaning into that.
Yeah.
Um, and always going deeper. Like it's amazing how you can do this work for years and then you can come to a conclusion or come to see a belief that you hadn't seen before and you're like, Jesus, like I didn't realize that was there.
Mm.
So yeah, that's where
Yeah,
I'm at.
it's fascinating. It's just such fascinating work. And so the one of the most profound kind of breathwork experiences I had was with a holotropic breathwork. And that was like, oh God, we went deep into that for about 3 hours. Like, and it was absolutely fascinating. But during that journey for me, it was through some of my shamanic training. We did it as part of one of our weekend practitioner trainings. And actually it's interesting because we did a lot of ecstatic dance that weekend, and of course there was that kind of uncomfortable part of myself. I was like, people are going to see me doing this, oh my god. But it's funny because I love doing the breathwork sessions at home alone by myself. Funnily enough, as we talk about shame and what people will think of us, because I tend to shake an awful lot during my sessions. So I love doing your Sunday sessions because I can shake and shout and scream and do whatever I need to do, but I'm not disturbing other people in the process, you know. And like that is totally, that's my fear of being a burden to other people around me, obviously. But it's interesting because during the holotropic breathwork session that I did, where we went deep into that, I actually lost all sense of what was happening around me, and just the visualizations that were coming. It was actually like, funny enough, I haven't told anybody outside of the weekend, but during that, I went through the process of actually birthing. It was obviously birthing. Um, uh, I was birthing a sense of deep shame at the time because I was working very deeply with shame, but also it was like birthing a light baby, essentially. And I think by working through the shame, I was bringing that kind of light into the world. And because I think a lot of the time, the shame that I was holding, even coming on this journey to get to here, even with the podcast and everything like that, was you have to work through so much fear surrounding what's going to be perceived of you. What if you say the wrong thing? What if someone picks that up wrong? Like, and did you find that when you were on journey with your podcast that you were breaking through all of these fears and barriers yourself?
Certain things I do, I just do it because I want to do it, and I don't really care. And I think the podcast was one of those things. I never had any expectation with the podcast. The podcast did over 2.5 million downloads or something, which was never, again, never the plan. I think it did 250 episodes over 5 years, and I would just chat and talk. The reason I stopped toward the end was because I was starting to think, what do people want rather than what do I want to talk about? That's why I stopped, and I don't really want to do things from that place. I massively insecure when I started out, and when I look back at what I was putting out when I was in the fitness days, I cringe, and I realize how much I was looking for attention and all that kind of stuff. But I guess I've worked through. I definitely worry. Professionally, I don't worry what people think of me, but maybe outside of that, and in some ways I do. In relationship, I do sometimes. In different areas, I do, and so definitely, I was peeling through layers and everything else. It's funny you mentioned the rebirthing idea. I trained in rebirthing breathwork also, which is holding someone in a hot tub for an hour as they do a breathwork session to recreate the womb. It's pretty out there and pretty wild, but we had some kind of incredible sessions with that. I remember doing a session and I was being held in the water face down with a snorkel, breathing for an hour, and I could just hear, like, there was maybe eight people in the pool or in the hot tubs around the place, and it was bizarre. I could hear like the tears from an incubator ward, and relive those implicit memories, the memories that are held in the body before we have conscious awareness. So that was pretty wild. But and funnily, on that training, the rebirthing training, we did warm water and cold water rebirthing. Cold water was just kind of pool temperature. It's supposed to represent the masculine more, so the father wound, and then the warm water is the womb, so it's the mother wound, or the birth traumas. They say is our first big trauma, because we're in this warmth and we've got all our needs met, and then we come out into the world and you take this gasp of cold air, and it's like, where am I? Everything's terrifying on some level. But we also did this piece around. I'm trying to think what it was called. I think it was called The Biggest Lie or something like that. It was to find your biggest limiting belief, and generally it comes back to I'm not enough or I'm not lovable. Those are generally the two. We have a million ways of saying it, but those are generally the two. And I remember we played with the beliefs, and my thing was I'm not enough, or I'll never be enough. And I can't remember the context, but I got to the point of being able to laugh at that belief and be like, how much easier would life be if I just believed that, like, just fully owned it rather than fighting with it. I'm not enough. I'm probably never going to be enough, and that's fine. What's the big deal? Like, it took away all. It's hard to describe, but it took away all its meaning and all its power. It's just like, well, it's just a thought. It doesn't really matter. And if I just let it be true, I can just be free. But if I fight with it and I got to get rid of it, then it's like resistance.
Yeah.
And
And that's the thing. We can create so much conflict for ourselves in our thoughts, can't we? I love listening to all the kind of thought leaders on a lot of this stuff with regard to kind of, you're not your thoughts. Just let them move. Just let them move. Let the energy move through you. Let the emotion move through you. You don't have to attach anything onto it. And I like, it's so challenging to actually do that. First of all, but when you reach that breaking point, like what you were talking about there, where you lean into actually saying to yourself, do you know what? Okay, fine. I'm going to stop fighting against this, and the whole body can just actually soften around it, and it just changes our complete view on the whole situation, kind of the journey that we're on with the turmoil we're creating for ourselves. you know
yeah. I think another kind of supportive piece for me is just the parts
Mm.
work idea, that we're many different parts. So I have an inner child, I have a wounded teenager, I have a perfectionist, I have an overachiever, I have a confident guy, I have all these different parts of me. And so I sometimes just question, like, who's having this thought? The thought of I'm not enough is not the 36-year-old man that's here. It's the 8-year-old boy that didn't feel like he was enough. So tuning into that, the part of me that judges other people in the wellness industry, they don't know what they're doing. It's like, okay, well, that's also not the 36-year-old man. That's a younger version of me who feels insecure and needs to project outward his insecurity by pulling other people down. So it's interesting to just check in with yourself and not, again, get rid of the thought. Be like, what part of me is having this thought? What part of me holds this belief? Because it's probably not the adult you. Because the adult you is fine. It's a part of you that got frozen in time because they didn't think they were enough.
A couple of years ago, when I left the HSC, And I was like, there has to be more to health. There has to be more to what we can offer people on this journey with their health. Because it was a sick care system rather than a healthcare system in my eyes, you know. And I decided to go away on an adventure to kind of come back to myself after kind of many years and exams and all of these things that kind of pulled me away from myself in a lot of ways. And a friend gave me your book for the beginning of my journey, the Fit Mind book. And I remember sitting onto the plane. I flew over to the States. I went to Sedona and I went to all these magical spiritual locations where I could kind of like tap into my body and higher guidance. And your book was a pivotal part of that journey, actually, because it spoke into those different archetypes, but it also gave some amazing journaling prompts. To kind of really challenge your thinking around uh, kind of the narrative, I suppose, that we create within each of those archetypes. And I sat and I read, I didn't stop reading, I read for most of the flight over to the States because I was like, this is fascinating actually. And then when I got over there, I went through each of them and did all my journaling points. And I learned so much about myself on that journey because you know, sometimes we don't realize it's the hats thing. We're wearing all these different hats. And like the book was just so brilliant. So obviously if people are listening to this and they haven't read it, I'd highly recommend that you get your hands on it and lean into the journaling aspect of it to really challenge yourself to go deep into that, because I didn't really journal much before that, and that was an amazing tool in the self-care toolbox that we were talking about. Um, I don't do it every day, but I do lean into it when I want to kind of explore deeper aspects of what's happening for me. Um, and is that something that you have done on your journey or that you do? Is it something that you recommend when you're working with people?
Yeah, journaling's changed everything for me over the years.
Mm,
I think, people talk about addictions and like addiction to alcohol or to gambling or to porn or whatever it might be. I
mm,
think ultimately the biggest addiction is our addiction to our identity,
mm,
like our addiction to our beliefs,
mm,
because the beliefs have kept us safe. Like the purpose of the ego is to keep us safe in the world.
mm,
We learned a way of being that ensured that we'd live another day. So being a people pleaser, being a nice guy, being an overachiever, being hardworking, all of those things have served people up to a certain point.
mm,
Uh, and so it makes sense that I would be addicted to those parts of myself. And what journaling has allowed me to do over the years is just to go beyond that.
mm,
Um, yeah, so lots of different practices. Morning pages I love,
mm,
which is Julia Cameron's work, which is just stream of consciousness, just 3 foolscap pages, write whatever comes to you and just brain dump and get some of that noise on paper. I find that quite clearing. Byron Katie's work. I spent a year doing Byron Katie's work about 10 years ago. She's thework.com. She's got a bunch of free resources. And Byron Katie's work is around challenging your beliefs. And it's a meditation of sorts. It's like, okay, well, most of us blindly believe everything that we think.
mm,
And so, how would it be to challenge a thought? So, to sit with paper and to go through it. And there's basically 4 questions she asks. So, she's amazing. I must get back into Byron Katie's work. Amazing lady. She'll ask you to identify a belief that you're holding. So, my friend doesn't care about me.
mm,
Something happens that leads you to believe your friend doesn't care about you, and then she'll ask, "Is the belief true? Yes or no?" And you might say, "Yeah, it's true." If you're very attached to it, you'll say, "Yeah, it's true." And then her second question is, "Can you absolutely know that it's true?" And that's like, it's like a meditation. It creates a bit of space where maybe you challenge it. Well, I can't absolutely know because I'm not in their head,
mm,
but I think that my friend doesn't. And then the third question is, how do you react or how do you respond or what happens for you when you believe that thought?
mm,
Let's say there's lots of resistance in me, there's stress. I feel like other people don't like me. I'm uh, judgmental toward my friend. And then her fourth question is, who would you be without that thought? And ultimately it comes down to I'd be free.
mm,
I'd be loose. I'd be uh, happy. I'd be content. Her process is challenging
mm,
the ego because, of course, you want to believe the thing. No, it's my friend's fault. It's not my fault. But she kind of says, I think we're like a projector screen. And if there's dust on the projector, then everything you project is going to show dust on it. And it's not because of what's out there, it's because of our unclean filters. So
Mm.
would recommend Byron Katie. But journaling is definitely a practice that is supportive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing, and I love that um, reference to the projector and the dirt.
Mm.
And it's so funny because I think we all live so much of our lives in a space where we don't realize we're actually projecting so much stuff. Like, and I know in my own previous relationships and all of these things, it's so easy to do that uh, from a very subconscious space. Um, and it's lovely. Thank you so much for providing some tools there to actually be able to work and lean into that. And funnily enough, the morning pages is something that I recommend for a lot of my clients coming through to actually just, I was like, sit down, start talking about the yogurt that you just had, the oats, and I was like, and just allow it to flow out of the body.
Yeah, I'm actually writing another book at the moment, which is obviously a slightly different a slightly different process to the free writing. But one thing I learned from writing is that um, there's an editor and there's a writer, and I think Julia Cameron talks about this. And the purpose of the morning pages is to get the editor out of the room and just to brain dump. So you've got that perfectionist character, just let them be somewhere else so that you can actually create.
Mm,
And I find the same with writing a book. Is the first couple of books I tried to write, it'd be like judging every line, and does this make sense? Okay, am I going to get judged by a psychologist because I got the lingo wrong? And I'd just be questioning. It'd be a really slow process. And now the new process is just half an hour timer, boom, just brain dump.
mm,
Okay, another half an hour timer, brain dump, do that 4 times, then go back and rewrite it 6 or 7 or 8 times and tidy it up. But
mm.
if you don't, that's a side note on writing a book, but you need to basically, there's an editor in your mind who filters everything you actually think and actually want to say and actually want to write.
Yeah.
And you need to let them sit outside of the room for a while every now and then.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. And so for people who are just starting out on their journey, do you think that the morning pages is a good place to start to actually begin to tease out the thought processes that are going on through the body? Or where would you recommend people starting to actually begin to work with the body or even to get into breath work?
Yeah. Couple of places, I think. In terms of breathwork, Wim Hof was a really good starting place for me a couple of years ago because it's very tangible. There's an app you can get that's free. I think there's videos on YouTube and you just follow along. So Wim Hof I found quite useful. One of the good things with Wim Hof for people that aren't familiar is you'll take 30 to 40 really deep breaths, and then you do a breath hold where you hold your breath for say a minute and then you repeat it a couple of times. What I found useful at the time was that I was very made much of thinking. I was in my head all the time, and having to focus on counting my breaths and then on having something to focus on in terms of holding the breath, it gave my mind something to anchor onto. And so that allowed my mind to quieten versus just trying to sit and meditate, which I found difficult at the time. So something like Wim Hof can be good. Coherence breathing is probably the most researched breath around. This is a really strong breath for it's got numerous health benefits. It's incredible. So you just breathe in for about 5 seconds, out for about 5 seconds. You just create this coherence. There's a track on Spotify called Two Bells, which is free, and it's two bells. And so when it dings, you breathe in. When it dongs, you breathe out, and you just do this. And the health benefits are just insane with the coherence breath. So that's a nice practice on the breathwork side of things. Wim is more activating and energizing. The coherence breath is more grounding and stabilizing. Those would be a good place to start. And then I think, funnily, what came to me when you asked the question was, which I've never really thought about or said before, is I think there's probably merit in listening to this kind of stuff that we're talking about now, so that I've become aware of that. Well, I'm repeatedly aware of that, but what we are consuming on a regular basis really does start to impact kind of where our focus is. So if you want to be a marketer, listen to marketing people. If you want to focus on your wellness, listen to wellness stuff. And I think maybe that could be a nice place for people to start going for a walk a couple of times a week. Some of the time go without any audio and just listen to your thoughts. Other times go with wellness content.
I absolutely.
There's a million places you could start, but I think listening to different stuff can be a good way of picking up ideas. Like, people will pick up ideas from our conversation. Maybe some of it will resonate, maybe some won't. But the more you listen to, you'll find your thing. You gotta expose yourself to new conversations and new ideas, I suppose, to find new potential and insight.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I do say this to people regularly who are with me, obviously, because from an energetic perspective, we are consuming energy in the form of the stuff that we listen to, the things that we're watching. It's not just food for energy, you know. Um, and I love that suggestion of actually just paying attention a little bit more to actually what kind of information are you consuming, and can it bring you on a journey, to being in a better space.
Yeah.
And also, I just wanted to add in as well, one thing that I recommend for some of my clients is the Awesome Breathing app. And it's a little
Okay.
circle that kind of goes bigger and smaller. And
Oh, nice.
it's
Yeah.
it's really lovely because there's like box breathing, and there's like different structured breathing patterns that you can just follow the circle on the screen. And that's free to
Okay.
download onto your phone. If people are listening, they find that that's helpful for them. So
Nice.
just as we're finishing up, Pat, I just wanted to touch base with you about this amazing breathwork practitioner or facilitator course that you're starting out about, and I'd just love to hear a little bit more about it, and for the listeners to be able to kind of to hear what you're offering.
Oh, thank you. It's like most of what I've done over the last 10 years. It wasn't really planned as such. It's just kind of unfolding. I've been studying breathwork for 8 years with lots of great teachers. I've studied, as we talked about, the trauma release stuff, studied with Gabor, studied just under amazing teachers for the last 8 years. And so um, I've been leading donation-based classes for 3 years every week. And there's just been people repeatedly asking, like, when are you doing a teacher training? When are you doing a teacher training? And I would always send them to different teachers. And then I just felt like it was time. So it's a 6 months training, different types of breath work, but largely the conscious connected breath work, and really helping people to learn how to hold these sessions online or in person for groups or for individuals. And there's different breathwork trainers, and there's like, I love the community in the sense that there's other trainers that I would happily recommend. Like, so I'm basically doing calls with people to see if it's a good fit for them. And if it's not a good fit, I'll send them to my friends that are other teachers that might suit them better. But my niche, I suppose, within it all is I think the processes around the breath work. So not only are you learning about the breath work, but you're learning about the shadow and learning about trauma integration, learning about emotional regulation, all these different skills. So yeah, it's a 6 month deep dive. Of course, anyone going through it is going to have a deep personal journey and also come out certified to teach. So it's a new initiation for me. Like everything else that we do, when it's new, it brings up fears and insecurities and new things to learn and things you don't expect. But I'm excited, and it feels like the next natural step.
That's amazing. That is amazing, and it's such it's such an important offering, and we definitely need more really skilled breathwork teachers out there, and to be able to learn from you with that kind of breadth of knowledge and the skill that you bring to each of these sessions, and actually just feeling into the energy of what I feel when I'm doing your sessions. It's almost like when I close my eyes and you start to speak, I see you like a warrior of souls, actually. Like
I'll take that. Thank you.
like you're bringing, it's almost like there's a fog with everybody in the room. Everybody's just standing looking for the path, and you hold the lantern that leads them through the fog. That's how I
Well,
tend to see the sessions when I close my eyes. I'm quite visual when I start these journeys. Um, and I'm very particular about who I work with on an energetic basis, just with who's in my energy and what's happening. And I think it's so lovely that actually feeling protected and safe and guided by you during the sessions that you offer is so important. And I urge anybody that's thinking about getting on board to definitely touch base with you, because you provide such a beautiful, safe way of exploring these parts of yourself, and the teachings that you're offering, I'm sure, will be mind blowing. So, thank you so much, Pat. I'm so grateful that you've come
pleasure.
on to chat. It's been fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. You're a fascinating man.
Well, listen, if I ever feel down, I'm going to listen back to your lovely words. Thank you.
Do. And thank you so much for being with us. And have a beautiful weekend. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. I'll see you on Sunday.
I'm going to a stag party in Glasgow this
Oh,
weekend,
that's
so it's a
so.
very different way of life this weekend.
Well, then we'll see you for breathwork next weekend then. But have an amazing weekend. I hope you have fun. Bring some
Thanks, Tony.
joy to the heart.
Thank you.